This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
Being stuck on certain routines that would give me an error, and I knew there must have been a simple answer, and so I'd be going off to sleep there, and I'd wake up 2 hours later, my mind was still, that's it.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Matthew McGinley was the creator and publisher of Elite Personal Accountant, financial management software for the Atari 8-bit computer. He released it in mid-1985 after working on it for several years. The review of Elite Personal Accountant by Stephen Roquemore in Antic magazine said, "This new program from a small company has just about every capability built into it that anyone could dream up, and the manual is one of the finest I've ever encountered. Elite Personal Accountant will handle 79 categories divided into income, expense, asset, and liability groups. As many as 9 credit cards are handled separately, but counted as liabilities. There are 17 different transaction codes available. The reporting capabilities go well beyond the competition, with an option that allows you, within limits, to design your own reports." I found Matthew through an eBay listing where he is selling the source code, disks, printouts, and development notes for the software. This interview took place on April 10th, 2018.
So you're going back to a whole different world. You're going back to the late 70s. I was born in 1961, October, and I graduated high school, Ballard High School in 1979. And in my spare time, I used to go down to the Radio Shack, and they had a computer called the TRS-80. We called it the Trash 80. It was a unique operating system that they had, black and white screen, self-contained. And they had this one game, I don't know what they called it. I think it was something like Star Wars, and there were little X's and O's, and it was like solid cubes that you would fire at one another. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. And well, it was beyond my means to buy. It was $1,000, which would be like, what, $4,000 now. And anyway, so that piqued my interest. That's when I first got interested in computers, because before that, I had just had an Atari 2600. I had gotten that for Christmas in 1977. I was the only kid in the area to have one. It was $200 back then. So again, multiplied by 4. Everybody said, wow, this kid's got this Atari video game system. And so I was already familiar with the games that Atari had. They were 4 kilobytes. That's all they could get into those cartridges, which were hellacious expensive, equivalent to about $150 now. And so my interest in the games was there. But then as I graduated high school, I started getting older. I thought there's got to be some kind of practical use for these besides playing games, like record keeping was the first thing that came to mind. So there were some tragic events in 79. My dad died, left me some money, left me a house. And I had seen commercials for the Atari home computer in 1980, and I became highly interested in that. And so I'd go down to my local computer store. It was called Creative Computers back then. Mr. Cressman had a store there. And they had, among other things, they had the K-Pro, which used a CP/M operating system, was a proprietary operating system. And Microsoft DOS 1.0 had already come out. Mm-hmm. And they were one of the few authorized Atari dealers. They had to buy so many units. They couldn't just, buy one unit. It wasn't profitable for anyone. So I would go down there in my off time, because I worked as a janitor and a dishwasher. It wasn't a glorious position, but I was still fascinated with computers. So I'd go down to Creative Computers in my spare time. And since I had already had familiarity with how computers worked and I could type, I'd already had 5 semesters of typing in high school. I could type 90 words a minute even back then. And I could show people what the computer can do, and within 5 minutes, people were buying them. And the guy offered me a job. He said, "Dude, you want a job here? I mean, seriously, none of these guys know how these things work." And I said, "Sure, as long as I can get $600 a month." I'd already owned a house. My dad left me a house. I said, "Sure." So I did that for 2 years. Worked at that computer store, as mostly technical support. I wasn't very good about asking people for their money. So I would just sell them on the product and then let someone else close it out. So during that time, I was very, very, I wouldn't say angry, but frustrated at the really crappy financial programs that were out there, because I wanted to keep track of stuff in my checkbook, and I wanted to see charts and graphs. I wanted to see where my money was going, because back then, very, very few computers could access what they didn't even call it the internet then. It was just kind of a bulletin board. And there's no possible way back then that nobody even thought you could access your checking account to see what your balance is or see transaction activity, nothing like that. So just the hope of seeing reports of how you had entered the data. You would have to manually enter the data, but then you could rearrange that data and report it in any way you saw fit. But there was no program that I had envisioned out there, so I started writing a program. I learned BASIC, which is not unlike HTML at all, and I read the manual on what commands did what, dedicated pretty much all of my free time to doing that. And by 1985, I'd get 4 years into the program, because I would always come across an error because there were so many commands. Each of the 4 modules in the Elite Personal Accountant took all 32 kilobytes of memory. And I learned ways to save memory. One of them was to declare variables, because if you used a constant, let's say you say the number 6, that took 6 bytes of memory, regardless of what the number was. And the highest number the computer can address was 65, I think it was 65536. Being an 8-bit system, you couldn't really address it, and you would have no need to. It would just say 1E plus and then the number of digits, but you wouldn't have any real need to do that with an accounting program. We're just talking dollars and cents, right? So I would declare all my variables, and I would go A1, A2, A3. So whenever I wanted to use a number, I would use the number A1 instead of 1. I'd use 2 bytes of memory instead of 6 bytes of memory. So I came up with ways to save memory that way, and was able to put all of the modules that make the program onto 2 disks. I believe they were single-sided, single density, 88 kilobytes per side. You didn't really want to flip the disks over back then, which some of us did. You could put a notch on the other side of the disk. Yeah, because they were 5.5-inch floppies, but if there was no notch there, the computer would think that it was locked and you couldn't write to the disk, which you could load. But the problem with that is now you're reversing the particles, and now instead of, you're cleaning one side, but then you're unloading the other, and now you're putting dirt back onto the disk, which were very, very sensitive, nothing like jump drives now, or even the sealed 3.5-inch floppies. These 5 1/4s were very temperamental. I mean, if you got them in the heat, you left them in your car, they would be useless. If they got cold, they were useless. I mean, you had to really take care of them. And one of the big complaints that I had read from and heard from other users of the software was, dude, they've got this thing locked. I can't make a backup copy. I'm not going to go out and sell it. I know you guys worked hard. And well, there were a few dishonest people that would make illegal copies. It was easy to copy. And there were some primitive forms of copy protection back then. I don't know how they did it. It was like 4-bit or 8-bit encryption. And I didn't do that when I wrote the Elite Personal Accountant. I decided, you know what, you give me $50 for this program, and you can keep it for life, and you can make as many copies as you want. I'm going to trust you to not give it away. And if you want to, if you think that maybe you paid too much, fine, I'm not going to stop you. I didn't want to limit people that way, so they could make their own copies. And I sent a copy off to a guy named Jerry, I believe it was Jerry Roquemore, down in California, at Antic magazine. I said, hey, why don't you do a quick review of this program? And he did. I believe it was in the May issue of Antic.
Yeah, it was Stephen Roquemore, March 1986.
Stephen Roquemore, yeah, that was it. And if you read that review, and his last line was, I'm switching to the Elite Personal Accountant from now on. And he had included my phone number, so I would get off my graveyard shift and my phone would be ringing.
Really?
Orders, COD. And then I'd come home and I'd have like 5 or 6 orders, and back then, $60, $60, because, the shipping. It was really exciting that people wanted something that I made and that they found it useful. The only problem was the computer had reached its feasibility. The 8-bit market was dying out. Atari had mismanaged their assets. They went from, I think, $1 billion to less than a fraction of that in a 18-month period. I think it was 85 to 87.
Yeah.
And then, I got distracted. I saw Top Gun, and I joined the Navy. I pretty much gave up on the program. I think I made about $5,000 off of that, just from like 40. I sold like 40 of the programs. I had to pay for the packaging, the binder. I paid, I think, $4 each for that. I made my own copies. I wrote the documentation. I edited it for what it was worth. And that's about it.
Wow.
After that, I really pretty much released interest in the Atari. I got into IBMs. I never was into Apple because there was just something about an Apple that I just didn't like. That doesn't mean they were bad computers. I did resent the fact that they I thought they were overpriced. And Atari was reasonably priced, and the graphics were much better. The sound was much better. And I thought you could do more. So that's about it in a nutshell.
So you went in to create this one piece of software that you needed. That's the only piece of software you created, it sounds like.
Well, I did another program for a guy that wanted to keep track of inventory, so I made him like a spreadsheet program. But that was just a proprietary commission deal. I think he paid me $200, and it took me 40 hours, and it was just a simple X and Y, input the numbers, and it would print reports. That he just wanted to keep track of his reports, and he didn't want to pay the price of VisiCalc, which I think back then was $500, which again multiplied by 4.
Sure.
If you're a consumer back then, that was considered a luxury. Businesses, they had no problem paying for that. The IBM, I think, was $5,000. A good printer was $2,000. So you would need $7,000 just to get a 256K system and 2 floppy drives. Well, with an Atari, you could pretty much get everything for $1,000 and play games. So if you were an Atari buyer, you were interested mostly in entertainment and possibly communications, because bulletin boards by 85 had already been set up all over the country. And they were cheap to access. Mostly you just had to pay the long distance fee, which back then was exorbitant compared to now, where everybody gets free long distance. So.
Yeah. All right, so I have an off-topic question. Was the Navy anything like Top Gun?
There was a lot of things, yes and no. There's a lot of technology that Top Gun did not reveal because they didn't want the Russians, who may have been watching. I mean, nobody dogfights in jets. And nobody fires a missile from 500 feet away like they did in the movie. Those missiles that they fired, the AIM-7 and the AIM-9, they had the Sparrow and the Sidewinders. Those missiles were fired from 60 miles away, and the opponents never saw each other. And the F-14, I believe that was the F-14D, that iteration of the Tomcat could track 6 targets at once and fire at 6 targets simultaneously. There was no way you would get an F-14 into combat, especially against the Russian airplane, because the F-14s were not that maneuverable. So pretty much that movie was just for entertainment, not for information.
Sure.
But it was fun to watch, and I thought, God, if you could score that easily, And then I realized how short Tom Cruise was. He's only like, 5'7". Kelly McGillis and I are the same height. She's like 5'11". I thought, wow. And I didn't want to be a dishwasher my whole life, and I didn't see the Atari taking off, because by then it already had reached the pinnacle of its success. And so in the Navy, I had used all of the computer skills I had amassed, and they had placed me out a T-45 TS training squadron out in Kingsville, Texas, because nobody there knew how to use the computers that they had. There were a few, but just the basic features. So I said I had already programmed a computer, and I already knew how to type. And I knew the technical aspects of I could repair a computer if I had to. The components were pretty simple. So yeah, I was a godsend to them at the time. So I did that for 5 years. So
Nice. So did you end up using this software yourself?
absolutely, I did.
Mm-hmm.
You're darn right. That's why I wrote it, because I was really mad I became angry at the lack of creativity that was put into the one that Atari had. And it used to crash all the time in the middle, and I would lose data. And so they didn't have good error trapping routines. And I set that up to where if an error would occur, at least you wouldn't lose your data. And I made it so you could print reports and see exactly where your money was going. So I did it mostly for me. And then I thought, well, what the heck? Let's see if somebody else can use it. Most of the programs I had seen, one of them comes to mind, it was called the Home Accountant, which was much better than the Atari had, which they were executing one command per line, which is a huge waste of memory.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized you could get up to 255 characters on a line. It would separate your commands by semicolons, so I could get 15 commands on one line for the same amount of memory.
Mm-hmm.
Which would, that's a huge benefit if you're trying to create a program with some detail to it. So
mm-hmm.
you could do more features. And I thought, well, if I can dream it up, I should be able to put it in there. What if I wanted to total expenses, but I didn't want every category? I set it up to where you could customize the reports. No other program had that, not even VisiCalc. And they didn't have help menus. They had a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then that would say add, edit, delete, and there was no information what it did. So I had set it up to where if you would highlight one of the commands, there would be a little box over to the right with an explanation as to what it did. So it was a Windows-based program. You had little windows of help, which were available even inside the program while you worked. So I kind of think Microsoft got a hold of that and didn't tell me. Which, by the way, they ripped off Apple, in my opinion. I can say that, right? They stole the whole idea of Windows from Apple and didn't even give them any credit, and then created their own software. But because it was different computer program, I had got into an argument with the Copyright Office over this. Unless it's a specific program, you cannot copyright a format or an idea.
Right.
You can't do it. So Windows, Microsoft's version of Windows, which was to come out later in the 90s, even though they had stolen, I'm going to use that word because this is what they did. They copied the idea from Apple. It was still their program, so they could copyright it and make all the money that Apple didn't. So I didn't even know of either of the Windows program before I just thought it was just the right thing to do, to explain to the user what they're doing, because they didn't have a clue, and then they didn't want to stop in the middle of their editing or adding data and go to the manual every single 2 minutes. I said, why not just put a line of text in there? If you use the quotes, you can tokenize it, and then you can use 8 bytes of memory instead of 1 byte per character. See? So that, again, would save memory, put more features in there, and then more people would want it.
So you said you sold about 40 copies of this?
40.
Yeah.
I didn't even keep track of how many I sold.
Were you happy? Were you happy with that? Were you satisfied? Were you satisfied with that?
No, I had wished I could go back in time to 1980 when the computer came out. Actually came out in 79. If I had gone back, mm-hmm. and if I had that program ready to go in 1980, the potential is staggering. Millions. I could have made millions off of that program, easily 20 or 30 million. And Atari had set up something called the Program Exchange. I think it was called the Atari Program Exchange,
right.
APX,
mm-hmm.
where users could send in their programs. Atari would do most of the work, and they would cut you, I think, in at 10% of gross or 10% of, I don't remember specifically. But that's a way for an unknown person to at least get in the field of marketing and, make a little coin off of their work.
Yeah.
But this was way beyond APX, and I thought it should be mainline. But Had I come out earlier with it, yeah, I would have sent it to APX. It would have been more widely distributed than it was off of one magazine review. So yeah, I have regrets that way.
So the date of your program listing is March '85, and then Antic put it in the new products announcement around November '85. So I suppose it probably came out sometime between those two dates.
Right. That's how slow things worked back then.
Yeah, magazines were not.
We didn't have email. So, and we had to do things the old-fashioned way with pen and paper and the U.S. Postal Service, which I'm not saying anything bad about, but, it still took a few days to get down there, and then it had to go through 2 or 3 people. But according to the Copyright Office, they say that if you're going to create something that way, a literary work, you assign the date that it first takes tangible form. And in this case, it was 1985. Although I had started work on it in 1982, it really wasn't functioning because there were so many commands and so much data to it. I didn't really have all 4 modules working together until 1985, but then I was having all kinds of errors with the numbers and with the way the disk handles the data and then coming back to the data after you've shut the computer off. So I spent a year debugging the program. I didn't want to send something out there that was going to create more frustrations than it would solve problems, because then, people would hate me. I said, why didn't you go through this? So I thought I would try to think like a consumer. If I paid $50, I'd want the best thing you had to offer. I didn't want something you would just half baked just to make a buck. So I didn't think that way.
So I found you because you're selling your program, the listing and the rights to it on everything.
Copy, yes. The last listing of the source code before I joined the Navy. Yes, that's right.
Nice. So you said in it,
running on a. Yep.
Running on a what?
No, it was printed on a dot matrix printer. So to print the listing out at 30 characters per second, it took like an hour to print each of those listings out.
Wow.
And about 2 or 3 ribbons. Yes, actual ribbons.
So you said in the listing, there are over 45 pages of data that I crammed into 165K of disk space. How I did it is my secret. Yes, so I need to ask, what's your secret?
I pretty much told you the secret. I told you the secret already.
Oh, the
memory saving technique.
Sure.
Tokenizing, assigning a string of characters to a token. And a lot of what I did, I don't remember. I got so wrapped up to it back then, I don't remember half of how I did it. I look at the code now and I'm going, I still don't know how I did it. But I remember being stuck on certain routines that would give me an error, and I knew there must have been a simple answer, and so I'd be going off to sleep there, and I'd wake up 2 hours later, my mind was still, that's it. So I'd jump up out of bed, and I'd go right to the problem, and I would put in either a command or take out a command, and then I realized the way the Atari handles information, I was pretty much giving it more than it could handle, because I believe there's only one processor. It was a 6502. And I learned this pop command. See, I learned a new command, pop. And so if you look at the code, you'll see pop like 8 times in succession, pop, colon, pop, colon, pop, colon. Well, every time you pop, you're clearing the stack of old data and freeing up more memory. So that's one of the techniques I learned. So I would free up, every time it would go back to the main menu, it would dump the data that it didn't need, and if it did, it would just reload it, because if it's holding data in memory, then you can't cram any more commands in it, and it would just freeze up, and it would give you an error, out of memory error. And it wasn't the 800 that I programmed that Elite Personal Account on. It wasn't expandable then. You couldn't get 128K. It wasn't until I believe it was the XL series came out, you could do that.
Right.
Memory was expensive back then. Oh my God.
Yeah, it was.
What was it? $200 for 48K
I don't.
Kilobytes, not megabytes.
No, I don't remember. It really varied from 79 to for the life of the machine. So.
Yeah, and what I did was I didn't want to put all 4 modules on one disk and have you turn over the disk because then it would damage the first side. You want it. It's like a tire on a car. You want to keep it spinning one way. So I put it on 2 disks or 2 modules on 2 disks. And the Atari could only handle 88 kilobytes per side. And, not counting the other side, which some programmers did. And I thought that was not smart because, again, it was just a matter of time before the disk would crash because of the reversal, which would release the dust back onto the disk. He didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So I sent 2 disks with the program. The first one had add, edit, and setup, and then the other one had maintenance and reports. So you could just, you would leave your 2 modules in memory and just swap the disks out. It wouldn't hurt it. So.
Did you get feedback from customers?
Oh, yeah. I used to get phone calls saying, "Oh, my God, this is so good. Oh, thank you for writing this program. I wish I'd found it sooner." I go, "Yeah, I wish I could have released it sooner, but it took, I was just one guy. I didn't have a staff. I didn't have an editor. I didn't have anyone to write the documentation for me. So I did the work of about 15 people, which is why it took 4 years instead of, say, 6 months. Because I know that if I was a programmer back then, Atari would say, "You've got 90 days to get this done."
Right.
Who cares if it has errors? And well, I do. And so do the users. No, I'm not going to send it out if it's not working perfectly. And if you rush me, I got to take features out. So I worked on my own.
Nice.
So again, the only regret I had was not being able to release it back in, say, at least 1981.
Sure.
Instead of 85. But I kind of caught the tail end there. And if I would have had advertising, then I could have at least topped the $100,000 mark. But by then it was too late, and then the ST had come out, and I don't believe the Atari ST discs were compatible with
they
the
weren't.
8-bit system. Yeah, I think that was a 16-bit system. I didn't know much about it because, like I said, when I joined the Navy, I pretty much gave up on Atari. I released the interest in it, and then I got into IBM's and MS-DOS-based computers. So,
sure. As most of us did. So do you think that someone is going to throw down $1,300 for interest in this program?
You'll notice I lowered the price, huh? Well, because I'm signing the modules, and that's the last copy left from the 80s, and it's the only one in the world. I'd give myself 1 chance in 3.
Yeah.
But I thought I would at least offer it because, how much is a signed copy of Huckleberry Finn worth?
Sure.
Now, compared to 20 years after he had signed, it wasn't worth much then. But as I mentioned, it's just a very long-term investment that, if you just roll the dice, take a chance, and then in 100 years, oh my God, this is a program from 1985 signed, So you may not make your money in 20 years. It's something you would pass on. And I don't know if it's like Bitcoins. I hear those are worth a fortune, and they started out at $1. Now they're what, 11,000, 12,000 each. I'm not trying to do anything like that. I just want to offer something that they could say, yes, this is the only signed copy in the world by the guy that actually did it. And we're 35 years after. So if you add 100 to that, the older it gets, the more valuable it gets. So imagine finding something 1,000 years old that's still there. Now, I don't know how long the paper is going to last. I believe it's acid-free paper. It's not even yellowed. So it's the first batch of acid-free paper they started putting out. So it should last a few hundred years.
Cool.
Well, yeah, I hope to sell it. But if I don't, no harm, no foul.
Sure.
But when I do not have another copy. I mean, this is everything I got, all the program listings. Somebody had taken it, ClearStar Soft Technologies had compiled it into C for me, and they sold it for, I think it was the same price. So it would run faster. I guess it runs faster in C. I don't even know if it worked at all. I never saw that version, but I do have a copy of that goes with it. So.
So what do you do today?
Today? Today, I did absolutely nothing.
I mean, in general, what do you do these days?
Oh, what do I do these days?
Yes.
Well, I paint pictures now, acrylic on canvas. I have 47 paintings I've done already.
Nice.
Don't be impressed. Most of them are paint by numbers, but I have learned to paint. There's one game that I can't let go of. It's called Gun Griffin Blaze. I play that pretty much every day. I've amassed over, 600 billion points because it's never the same game twice, and they give you presents. I've written 3 books about driving. I wrote books about driving because I got so angry at how people drove or didn't drive that I took all that anger and used my writing experience from the Elite Personal Accountant. I put that into 3 books, spread over 5 years. Confessions of a Reformed Road Warrior. I did that in 1999. I did The Modern Driver, 2004, and then the Highliner, I wrote that in 2009. And those took the bulk of my spare time. And then I worked on some other projects like philosophy, religion, psychology. And I've written books. I just released a book using my pseudonym. I've never told anyone, but it's Swan Starling. Yes, you can find it on the internet. And then I have a sequel to that, Joyous 44, which took me about 5 years. And Jasper 45, I hope to have out within the next year. It's pretty heavy into religion and philosophy. So it's going to offend some people because it's absolutely politically incorrect, which is, I think, the way people should write, because more people are offending, or they're afraid of offending people's feelings rather than telling the truth. And I don't like to think that way. I'd rather hurt people with the truth than stroke them with a lie. So I used a pseudonym because I didn't want my family name attacked, but there you go. I've already told you what it is. Let people do what they will. And then also in my spare time, sometimes I just drive to the beach, go out and get a coffee. I'm approaching retirement. I got 5 years until retirement. I'm also a chef. I cook for a living for about 200 people in a retirement home. So that takes 5 days a week. And then at my age now, I'm almost 57, sometimes just doing nothing, taking a nap, watching TV. I'm into hockey. I don't know, like 1 out of 10 Americans are. I like to watch hockey. And, it's a 9-month season as opposed to football, which is only 6 months, And I enjoy being single. I'm not married. All the kids have grown up and moved out. The oldest one is 35. The youngest, I have a grand niece that's 16. So I'm not burdened with marital problems or anything like that. I just enjoy my free time and helping others any way I can. If they have a question, I'm fast to Google something. I'm always on the internet, doing research and reading how people react to stories. I like to know how people think. Some people would say I have a very boring life, and they're right.
I think this will be my last question. This podcast is listened to by people who still like to use Atari computers. So if you could, if you could send a message to the Atari computer community, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Never give up, never surrender. Galaxy Quest. Well, if you've managed to find a copy of the Elite Personal Accountant, I hope it still works. There's just a fascination with the old media that you just can't let go of. And I wish Atari had stuck with it and joined the 32-bit revolution. But I sometimes go to YouTube just to watch the videos that other people make of the games I used to play, like Caverns of Mars, Nautilus, Jawbreaker, which is really hard to find. People unpacking Atari. I just like to go back and reminisce. I'm very sentimental that way. So It's like people hanging on to rock and roll. It ain't quite dead yet, It's good for you.
Thank you very much, Matthew.
Yes, sir.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are 2 ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/Savitz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.